So welcome, thank you for joining us. My name's Emma Knaggs. I'm the grassroots leader here at Make Votes Matter. We'll go through an introduction to the Make Votes Matter movement this afternoon. And my co-host is my colleague Joe, who will introduce himself as well.
Hi there, I'm Joe. I'm the co-chief executive of Make Votes Matter.
So the structure of today, we'll go through some of the slides. We'll do a short presentation covering the basics of the Make Votes Matter movement. We aim for it to take roughly 20 minutes, and then we'll be able to answer some questions after that. At the end, if you want to ask a question, you can raise your hand digitally. So if you click at the bottom, you should have a button that says participants. If you click on that, there's a little option there that says raise your hand, and then we'll work our way through everybody who wants to ask a question. Just to repeat for anyone that's just joined, we are recording this session and we will share the recording on our website so that those people that weren't able to join us will be able to watch it back at their convenience. If you don't want your face to show up on that video, please just turn off your video camera. You should still be able to follow along and hear us if that's what you want to do. Okay, so I think we've done the welcomes. We'll go through a brief introduction, which Joe will cover, and then between us we'll go through the three strands of the Make Votes Matter campaign, which are the Alliance, the Labour Party and the Grassroots movement. And then we'll share some reading and resources on our website for you to be able to look into things in a bit more detail. And then if there's any questions at the end, we'll be able to cover those as well. So I'll pass over to Joe for him to introduce Make Votes Matter and the campaign that we're running.
Thanks, Emma. So Make Votes Matter is the cross-party single-issue campaign to get proportional representation for the House of Commons. We started around the 2015 general election, which, as I'm sure many of you know, was horribly disproportional. By many measures, the most disproportional election that the UK has ever had. And at that time, a 16-year-old member of Youth Parliament called Owen Winter started a Change.org petition, which over time collectors, and really Make Votes Matter was formed just by a few activists starting to organise around that petition and the sort of follow-up to it. And we went on quite a steep learning curve of getting into a campaign, as you tend to when you dip into campaign, and sort of gradually started ramping up, and we got to a stage of formally sort of establishing as an organisation in 2016. And we've been basically doubling in size ever since then, every year. Now I have quite a sizable staff team, and still obviously rely on a huge amount of volunteer activism, and volunteers really form the sort of basis of our movement. I'm going to say a little bit about funding because people always ask about that. Initially we just ran a couple of crowdfunders and really ran the campaign on a very shoestring kind of operation. Over time, we've got some additional grant funding from various grant-giving bodies, but really significant ones from the Joseph Rowntree Reform Trust, which over the last few years has increased the size and the pace of the campaign. But also continuing to run very important crowdfunders. And as we kind of mature as an organisation, we'll be, I think, more relying on supporters as a sort of major contribution to our operating costs. That's just a bit of background on the funding situation. But yeah, I'll hand back to Emma. Let's get into our strategy and our approach to actually winning PR.
Thank you, Joe. The Make Votes Matter campaign is made up of three what we call strands. So we'll go through all three of them together. The first one is the Alliance. So the Make Votes Matter Alliance is a collection of political parties, organisations and other public figures who all support proportional representation. So here is just a snapshot of some of mostly the political parties and other sort of key organisations that we work with, who are all part of our alliance and all support PR. The list is actually much, much bigger, and if you want to see the full list, the link is here, and you can go to our website and see absolutely everybody that is part of our alliance. A quick note, one of our allies, the Electoral Reform Society, people do ask us about this. We do work with the Electoral Reform Society, though we're not directly associated with them. They tend to have a much broader remit, so as well as campaigning for proportional representation, they also cover things like Lords reform, votes at 16, and transforming the way that local government is elected. And Make Votes Matter focuses solely on PR, but we do work together. The Electoral Reform Society tends not to have grassroots and volunteer actions as much. They tend to focus a lot on reporting and advocacy projects, things like that. So as part of the Alliance, we have quarterly meetings which are normally held in Westminster. Next week we'll be holding our very first one virtually. We haven't done this before, but obviously needs must. And ultimately, the Alliance has two key roles to play within our campaign. So first of all, our allies help us to support, promote, and participate in some of our actions for PR. So this is one of the key things that they get involved with, is promoting things like our action days, helping to raise the profile of Make Votes Matter and the arguments for PR. This was very helpful during the general election, for example, when proportional representation and electoral reform really got very high up onto the agenda and was being discussed quite a lot during the campaign in the general election. So here you can see some of the events that we have been working with our allies. This was the last alliance meeting that we held in Westminster at the end of January. Like I said, our next one will be online next week. And then this is the launch of our Good Systems Agreement, which I'll come on to in a second. It was launched last July in Parliament as well, and this is the sort of second part of why the Alliance is so important, is to build consensus around proportional representation. So this is where our Good Systems Agreement comes in. It is a document that we spent 18 months sort of putting together and brokering and agreeing the text on it. And it is a historic agreement on proportional representation. We don't think that many campaigns have managed to get such broad support for such a complex thing. So what it does is it defines the 10 principles of a good voting system and how we would choose one in the UK. And we recommend that that would be done by a citizens-led deliberative process such as a citizens' assembly. So again, the whole document is available on our website. If you want to follow this link, you can read it in full. It does not endorse any particular system of PR, and that was really down to trying to build consensus across a very broad range of parties. So many of the individual parties tend to support a specific system of PR, and we really wanted to try and bring as many parties together to build that consensus without actually specifying an individual system. So as you can see at the top, the parties endorsing it go from the Brexit Party to the Green Party, Lib Dems, Plaid Cymru, SNP, almost all of the British opposition parties apart from Labour. Joe will talk about Labour in a second, but if you want a little bit of bedtime reading, please download it from the website and you can read the Good Systems Agreement in full. Here we go. Next strand is the Labour Party. So off to Joe.
Yeah, and I mean, central to our strategy is the idea that we're not going to be able to achieve proportional representation, or almost certainly not going to be able to, unless we have one of the two biggest existing political parties on side. That's not going to be the Conservatives. We are doing everything we can to engage with Conservatives, and we have, for example, a Conservative MP who signed the Good Systems Agreement, and we'd love for the Conservative Party to come on board, but there's much more opportunity to bring Labour as a party behind proportional representation. And indeed, it's flirted with it in the past. So all of our work on Labour, or a lot of it at least, we do jointly with the Labour Campaign for Electoral Reform, which is the internal organisation within the Labour Party, which I'm also a member of and on the executive of. And we work very closely with them to try and influence Labour and its affiliates and get a firm commitment to electoral reform. Next slide, please. So one of the major things we've been doing is providing speakers to local Labour parties. The Labour Party is organised by constituency, so every constituency has a constituency Labour Party or CLP. And over the last couple of years, we provided speakers to over 200 local Labour meetings. 85 CLPs so far have actually passed a resolution saying that they believe in proportional representation and think the party should back proportional representation. And really everywhere we have been, the vast majority of CLPs, you take a show of hands at the end and almost always you find a large majority in favour of PR. Very rarely you find the room kind of evenly split, and I mean I can count on one hand the number of places we've been where there's actually been a small majority in favour of first past the post, so really overwhelming support. On the left on the map here we have the constituencies which have already passed these resolutions, and on the right there's just a tweet from a member of one of them talking about his motion being passed. And we're actually able to confirm the sort of experience we've had at these meetings in December, when we commissioned some polling by YouGov, who polled just Labour Party members, and they found that 76% of Labour Party members believes that the party should back proportional representation, 12% opposed, 12% undecided, so really quite overwhelming. And we can move on to the next one, please, Emma. So another side of the Labour Party equation is the affiliated unions. Trade unions have huge influence within the party, and right down to at the Labour conference, they have half of the delegates, so kind of half of the votes, half the decision-making power. There's about 12 affiliated unions in total. 2 of them, which you can see on the left, actually support proportional representation as policy already. 2 of them in the middle oppose PR as policy. Of the union members, most of the affiliated members of the Labour Party are just clustered into 3 huge unions, which are GMB, Unison and Unite. Between them, they represent about 80% of all the affiliated union members and have a sort of corresponding say in the party. And these are the ones that we've been looking at in particular. So last December, while the whole world was looking at the general election, we were also phone banking trade union members who are in favour of PR, getting them to put motions forward to their union conferences, which would happen this summer. And we have a whole load of motions going towards those conferences. Or we would if conferences were happening at the moment, but we'll have to see what happens with the whole pandemic situation. Maybe they don't get there quite as soon as we'd hoped. Actually, I think while we're still on this slide, I'll just talk a bit about the new leadership as well, because I don't think, no, sorry, we do have a slide for that, don't we? Great. So as you're probably aware, Kirsten Armour has become the leader of the Labour Party, and him, and actually, to be fair, all of the candidates who made it to the end of the Labour leadership contest had pretty good views on electoral reform as they go. So here's a quote from him, and I mean, he's actually said that this issue has got to be addressed by electoral reform, which is as strong as any Labour leader has been on this issue, definitely in the last couple of decades, but possibly much further back. So really we're focused on mobilising the grassroots support within the Labour Party through the party's policy processes, and really mobilising that to try and build on this kind of openness from the leader that is already there. Next slide, please. And here we've just got a couple of reports that we've done jointly with the Labour Campaign for Electoral Reform. the one on the left that we did in 2017, we actually pretty much turned around between the time the election was announced and the publication of the Labour manifesto to try and have as much influence as possible. And what I think is novel about that is we really look at electoral reform as a slightly partisan issue when talking to a Labour audience, because there are arguments which are very well substantiated about the kind of social outcomes you get under proportional systems, and how you're much more likely to get the kind of equal society that the Labour Party is all about through proportional systems. And there's a lot of evidence for this going back decades, but it's really been in isolation from the political debate about electoral reform until we put it forward in this report. And on the right, there's one we did last year, which is quite a lot more detailed and really gives a sort of end-to-end argument, trying to make the case that equal votes and equal democratic rights lead to a more equal society in other respects, which we published to commemorate the Peterloo massacre. Emma, I'll hand back to you, I think.
Thank you, Joe. So the third strand of the campaign is the grassroots campaign. So that's the one that I head up, and it's essentially made up of people like you. So our volunteers, our supporters, our local group leaders, everybody that is on the ground and campaigning to make votes matter. So the key role in any grassroots movement really is to pressurise politicians and parties, because ultimately, in order to get proportional representation, it has to go through Parliament and it has to be voted on by MPs. So that is the key role really of the general public, our supporters, our volunteers, and everybody that's involved in Make Votes Matter, is really to raise the issue of PR with their MP and try as best as they can to move their position into a position of supporting PR. This has been quite successful, in particular our one Conservative MP, who is Derek Thomas in St Ives. He was lobbied quite strongly by his constituents, and successfully they got him into our alliance. So lobbying does work, people power does work, so it is absolutely worthwhile doing. Another really important aspect of the grassroots movement is to build public support and understanding. So this is one of the key things with a topic like proportional representation. It isn't very sexy, it isn't very easy to understand, and much of the general public either doesn't know or doesn't care about the current voting system in the UK. So particularly our local groups and anyone who's willing to sort of have a chat with people, it's really important to be part of that education and raising the profile of PR in order to build that pressure from the general public in support of PR. Another really important aspect is attracting the attention of local press. So this is something that several of our supporters and some of our local groups have been really, really good at, is writing into your local newspaper, just from writing a short letter in support of PR or about a topic that's linked to PR, and that by chipping away at that, that can really raise the profile as well. Obviously at HQ we work really hard to try and get into the national media, which is not always easy, and especially at the moment it's very hard to get stories in that are not related to the current health situation. But every little helps, and it is always worth just writing a letter into your local newspaper and see where you get. So part of our strategy is to organise at least 2 mass action days every year, which we hope as many people as possible can participate. So these are photos from our Demand Democracy Day that happened last July. On the map you can see every little blue marker was either a street stall or an activity or leafleting or something that was happening on Demand Democracy Day. I saw a few names of people come up as you were joining, so thank you to everybody that's been involved in any of our mass action days. It is absolutely people like you on the ground that make it work. We were due to have the next mass action day in July. We had Saturday the 11th of July earmarked. Obviously, that date is a little bit up in the air at the moment. We really hope to be able to get something happening as soon as possible. But obviously, health and safety will be our #1 priority. So it all depends on how things lie at that time. Here we go. So another action day that was actually due to happen yesterday was a mass lobby of Parliament. So this is a photo of the last one that we did, which was the end of 2018, where we were hoping to get as many of our supporters down to the Houses of Parliament as possible to directly lobby their MPs in person. So like I said, that was due to happen yesterday. We had to postpone that for obvious reasons, and we really hope that we'll be able to organise another one as soon as possible, as soon as the situation becomes improved. And then here on the right, we have photos from our Hungry for Democracy, which was a 24-hour hunger strike for PR. We do debate about whether or not we should do another one of these, so we are still considering it, but at the moment we haven't got it in the schedule yet. But obviously a huge thank you to anyone that has ever participated in our action days. Like I said, we aim to have 2 per year. We try and make it as accessible as possible to get as big a support base as we can. So once things are back up and running and we start publicising, I really hope that some of you will be able to join us on one of our next mass action days. And then also a really important part of the grassroots campaign are our local groups. So we have around 30 groups all across the country, which is excellent. Some photos of some of the activities that we've done. And again, I've seen a few names on this afternoon of people that are part of our local groups or local group leaders. So again, a huge thank you to everyone that runs a local group, and it is always fabulous to see you, and they are a really, really big part of our grassroots network. If there is no local group in your area and you would like to start one, please get in touch with us and we can offer support to you as much as possible. At the moment, it's a bit hard for us to send actual physical materials like leaflets and things because we're all working from home. But once things are back to normal, we can send you things like these placards and banners and leaflets and really support you to get your group off the ground in your area. So please get in touch if that's something that you're interested in. So here's some information about some of the resources that we have available. Our resources page on our website, we've just updated it in the last week or two. So there are printable leaflets if you're able to print them at home, fact sheets and how-to guides, how to set up a local group, how to run a meeting, how to have conversations about PR with other people. And then these are a couple of links as well. So for the positive arguments for PR, go to proportional representation on our website, and some common myths about PR as well. We've got a section on our website debunking those as well. So if you go to myth busting, you'll be able to see a bit more details about what to say to counter some of the most common arguments against PR. Joe, have I forgotten anything or missed anything that you can think of?
No, I guess it's just worth sort of bringing together the fact that, I mean, our strategy and the 3 strands we have are based on what we think are the necessary conditions in order to bring about electoral reform. So we need the alliance and all of the people with public profiles using those profiles to draw as much attention to the issue as possible, and all the parties coming together to sort of support these action days and put their weight behind bigger and bigger action days. Alliance, of course, and we need one of the biggest parties to back electoral reform, and we need the grassroots movement to run the action days and to put real pressure on political decision makers, because this is the kind of change that doesn't just happen without that kind of genuine grassroots movement. And I think that's something that in the past, sometimes when people are in favour of electoral reform, it's one of those issues where it'll be nice to have, but it doesn't feel like it's something you can do much about. But we have to do something about it if we want it to happen. So we hope that it's clear that from our strategy, we're trying to cover all of those bases and make electoral reform happen in the next few years, not just in some future decade.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So if you have any questions, we have still got about half an hour to go before the end. So if you click on the participants button at the bottom of your screen, then you can click on raise your hands, and we'll be able to work through and answer as many questions as possible. So hopefully that will be great. And then also, if you want to get more involved in the Make Votes Matter campaign, if you are not already on our mailing list, if you saw this advertised through social media channels or something like that, then please go to join the movement and sign up, and you'll get all of our updates and everything as soon as possible. If you're a Labour Party member and you want to either invite a speaker to your CLP, or you're interested in putting a motion forward to conference, then get in touch with the Labour for PR campaign. And again, if you want to start a local group in your area, then drop us an email. So I see a few hands have been raised. So I'm starting off with Laurie Taylor, who I've unmuted, but I have a feeling you're not actually Laurie Taylor, are you?
Ah, can you hear me, Emma?
Oh yes, hi Laurie.
Hello, Emma. Hello, Joe. Yes, I just want to. I realise I'm Mr. Non-Techno, so I'm playing around with this as I go. I've done a little bit of this, but I'm finding my way. So I think I might be getting some things wrong. Anyway, you have two Laurie Taylors, I think. Is that right on your screen?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
The other Laurie Taylor, Emma. Hi, Emma. Hi, Joe. It's Caroline Voden, former MEP. No doubt she's got her hand up, and so we'll say something. And I'd just like to introduce her to you. Emma, I sent you an email, and you remember the email. And I forwarded the link to her for today as well, and I think she might be joining us in the Alliance meeting. Anyway, there she is. So there's two Laurie Taylors. I'm the real one. I haven't had a transgender thing or something or other. So thanks for that. I just thought I'd introduce her there. I suppose the question is, one thing is in the map of last July's actions. I know this is gone completely now, but you didn't show Totnes. We actually did something. It wasn't a street stall. We did the Ways with Words festival at Dartington. So we were out there being active. I don't think we weren't inactive at all, and we were leafleting people, and one of them was MP. Oh, which I leafleted. I've forgotten his name. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So with now, my question is, with Keir Starmer as leader of the Labour Party, this looks very promising, doesn't it? Over to you.
Over to Joe, I would say. Yeah.
Over to Joe.
Sorry if we missed you off that map, Laurie. We're very aware that you were active during that Demand Democracy Day. So we just got that from somewhere. I'm sorry if we didn't.
Let it go. Let it go. Fine.
Thank you. In terms of Keir Starmer, I mean, yes, it is promising that we have a Labour leader who is on the record as being that open to electoral reform, but it's by no means at all in the bag, and it's really something that even if he's personally in favour, we really need to bring out all of the support in the Labour movement and from wider beyond. It's so easy for it to be something that he supports but just isn't a priority, or to be something that he's in favour of, but then when he sort of meets the opposition, which does exist in pockets of the Labour Party, then he decides it's politically too difficult or something of that nature. And so, I mean, this year we're planning, or I should say for the next Labour Party conference, we're planning on having a really substantial project. And we're working not just with the Labour Campaign for Electoral Reform, but a whole range of Labour and democracy organisations to do a big sort of joint push and get as many motions to Labour conference as we can, and really try and do something decisive. Because if we just leave it to the leader and their position, then I wouldn't be sort of super confident about it. We need a lot more effort as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Laurie, for your question. Next up is Paul Brown. I'm going to unmute you so you can ask your question.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me?
Hi, Paul. Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, good. Thank you. I haven't got a microphone. My question's really about local government. I'm a Green councillor and in southeast England, and we finally got seven elected in mid Sussex at the last election. but of course, the weakness is that Labour are absolutely nowhere there apart from in Crawley, in local government. So I think it seems to me there's a huge advantage for them and for everybody else to get involved in local government, and they stand in a tremendous opportunity by having, if they were to support local government, proportional representation in local government. And it seems to me that my question really is, shouldn't that really come first rather than parliamentary? Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Joe, do you want to take that one as well?
Sure. I mean, we obviously support the principle of proportional local elections. I mean, it obviously makes sense to apply that at a local level as well as a general election level. But I mean, our specific aim is for general elections, both because we see that as the single change you can make, which would immediately unlock all of those other changes, such as local electoral reform and, you know, probably changing other things about our constitution as well. But I think point is just strategically, it's much easier to sort of mobilize people for a change for the system for general elections. And I think it's this phenomenon when you just don't get as high turnouts for local government because people they don't follow as closely local government and don't think of it as so important, and probably, you know, quite unfairly in many cases. But nonetheless, it is harder to mobilize people in a movement for a change which they see as slightly smaller. And at the same time, the opponents of change in Parliament and elsewhere, I think they see this approach coming, and they're going to fight just as ardently against reform at local levels as they are at national level. So that's kind of our thinking on it.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Next, Phil Cole. Please, you should be unmuted, so please ask your question.
Hello, Joe and Emma. Thanks very much for organising this meeting. Joe, you might remember me from the electoral reform SOC. I haven't got. These are two comments rather than questions. Firstly, I accept the fact that Make Votes Matter doesn't endorse one particular system of PR, but I think you might find it a bit awkward when people start saying to you, well, which system do you support? And at that point, you might have to make a decision. The other comment I was going to make, previous speaker, as Paul, was it, talking about no Labour councils where he is, there are none in Cheltenham either. But it does occur to me that you said that most Labour Party members favour PR at the moment. But to play devil's advocate, what happens if the Labour Party, by some fluke, wins a majority of seats in the Commons at the next general election? Do you think they will continue to think the PR is a good thing? I mean, I do, but do you think most Labour members will, or will they suddenly decide there are more pressing things to get on with? Okay.
Well, those are two very good points, and I think my response to them is kind of linked, actually, in that we have the good systems agreement to sort of avoid this necessity of talking too much about systems. And I mean, I certainly think there are occasions when it's useful. It would be an advantage to be able to say, well, this is a system. But in general, it avoids you having to sort of explain systems in more detail than most people were interested in, by saying we have this set of principles. We're going to have a proportional system which allows you to keep local MPs, and you know, that's generally enough detail. But the really key thing in there is also the fact that it calls for a citizens' assembly or something like a citizens' assembly to choose a system. What we're actually going to be putting to the Labour Party conference is a motion that calls for Labour to support PR in principle, but also for Labour to set out a process for how it's going to choose a new voting system in the next few years from opposition, working with other parties ideally, that will actually go into its manifesto. And I think once you have a sort of citizens' assembly, constitutional convention, either one, the party has kind of bought into, and that many of wider society have sort of got involved in as well, and that comes to a recommendation, it's so much harder to then back out of it once a government comes in saying it will implement the findings of that. So I hope that helps to some extent.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Next we have Alex Malcolm. I've unmuted you, so please ask your question.
Good afternoon. This is my first event of one of these.
Welcome.
You've talked about the Labour, and presumably the Lib Dems and Greens are all in favour of a proportional representation.
Mm-hmm.
How do we stand with the Conservatives? Are there any Conservative MPs that show the slightest interest?
So far we have one Conservative MP who is part of our alliance, who I mentioned before was Derek Thomas and St Ives. I think during the general election last December, we ran a campaign called Pledge for PR, where people were asked to lobby their MP or all of their candidates and ask them to pledge support for PR. And I do believe there was another Conservative MP who did take the pledge for PR. The problem is often when they then get voted in, their support for PR does tend to dwindle a little bit. But the Conservative Party is something that we are trying to make inroads into, particularly via the Young Conservatives and some of the pro-Brexit organisations as well. But so far progress has been slow, and obviously it's difficult. The Conservatives have such a strong support for first past the post because it benefits them so strongly that it's very unlikely that we will turn the Conservative Party. As Joe said, of the two major parties, Labour is much more likely to support PR as opposed to the Conservatives. So we're trying to make inroads in order to sort of really maintain our cross-party credentials. But progress is very slow, and we don't think that we will ever turn the whole Conservative Party over to supporting PR, to be honest.
Until we implement it.
But thanks for your question, Alex. Next up, we have Nicola Swan. I've just unmuted you, so please ask your question.
Thank you, and thanks for the introduction and everything. It's been very interesting. I'm fairly new to all of this, but I'm a member of the Labour Party in Shipley constituency, where we have a Conservative MP. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine for one moment he's in support, but I'm just wondering if you have in your resources a standard suggested first communication with an MP, and secondly, whether you track within your organisation the responses and views of each MPs, and therefore whether you have a list of target MPs who you think are foreturning, are borderline, and whether we can help focus on them, even if we're not their constituents.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Nicola.
Sorry, go on, Emma.
Oh, well, yes. So I was going to say, if you go to our resources page on our website, I shared the, here it is, where is it? Here. The resources page on our website, we do have some suggested letter templates and also ways to sort of write to your MP and request a meeting. So that's a good starting point for those. If you do have a Conservative MP, it's always worth trying to lobby them. We can probably say that their reaction might not be as warm or as interested as you would like, but there we go. With regards to lobbying other MPs, in theory, an MP should only be responding to their own constituents unless they're a minister. And with regards to targets, so we have a map of all of the MPs on our website, which shows what their position is, whether they support or don't, and we try and share a quote that they've publicly shared about either PR support or not support. Obviously, that is very much based on constituents getting in touch with their own MPs and telling us what they've said. So it's really useful for anybody that gets in touch with their MP who does reply back to them and gives a clear statement either of support or not. And we can always update that map and have things up to date on that. Joe, have I missed anything? I feel like I have.
And, well, just so that the map is actually in the process of being updated. So very shortly, you'll be able to go on the interactive map on the website and just select your MP and then email them straight from there, which we had running during the general election for candidates, but we're still getting the back end of that up at the moment.
And as a broader thing, we probably should have mentioned, we're working on improving our digital platform in general. So that's one of the things that we're working quite hard on during this period where there's not an awful lot of events and things that we're doing. So there are quite a few things on our website that are due to be updated and will be updated shortly. So keep coming back. So next, Peter Lord, I've unmuted you. Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, hi Emma, can you hear me?
Yes, hi Peter.
Excellent. Yeah, so I've got a statement first rather than a question, which is, it's blinking obvious to anyone that the minority party which benefits the most from first past the post is never, ever, ever going to support proportional representation, which of course is the Conservative Party.
Yes.
Even if you get every other party on board, you still will not have enough sway to actually push it through on first past the post. So, have you considered taking a leaf out of the Brexit Party's book? In other words, put forward MPs in 4.5 years' time, 650 candidates, deposits paid up to stand for MPM, and try to unite the vote that doesn't want their incumbent MP. So I'm not just talking about areas where they've got a Conservative MP and they're stuck with a Conservative forever. I'm talking about areas where they've got a Labour MP, because that Labour local vote happens to be the largest minority vote for that constituency. So that's point one, is run MVM candidates, 650 of them. But the promise is that having got a majority, assuming that the good people of this country are prepared to give us the majority, give you a majority, you promise that you'll implement proportional representation as quickly as possible and stand down calling a general election under PR.
Okay, Joe, do you want to maybe cover that one?
Well, it's an idea we've considered, but it's not one we really think is viable. And the reason for that is, you're quite right that the Brexit Party, or UKIP as it was previously, had great success in sort of having influence by just sort of taking part on the first past the post on a single issue. But really a better comparison, I think, is the Referendum Party, which predates even UKIP, which was a truly single issue party. The UKIP Brexit Party really only sort of started making real inroads, and even then over a long time, by becoming a party with a full manifesto, and it was concerned a lot about Europe, but it had other policies, and becoming a sort of fully fledged party. The Referendum Party really was just single issue, and it didn't get anywhere. And it's just because most voters are not going to make decisions based on a single issue. And of course, the alternative of setting up a party that has a full swathe of policies, well, there's all sorts of parties. In fact, most parties are already that. They already have commitments to proportional representation. And our view is that we've got to work with all of those parties and help work with them to achieve our goal. Although it sounds like a nice idea to set up a single issue party and stand candidates, in practice, I think it would just split support even further for the many parties that do support PR.
Thank you. So next, it says Laurie Taylor, but I believe it's Caroline Voden. You're unmuted. Hi.
Thanks, Emma. Hi.
Hi.
So I just wanted to talk to you about your sort of your fantasy timeline, if you like. So you're talking about hopefully having motions to go forward to the Labour conference this year. So first of all, let's assume that there is a Labour conference this year, which might not be. And let's assume that one of those motions does pass, which is also a long shot. But let's say the Labour Party vote in favour of electoral reform. Is it then possible to get from September 2020 get before the next general election, assuming that that's not held till spring 23 or 24?
24, yeah.
24, yeah. Is there enough time to hold the Citizens' Assembly, decide on a method, get it through the House of Commons? I mean, do you envisage this being possible before the next general election?
Yeah, absolutely. And towards the end of the last Parliament, there was some really interesting projects which were being done. I don't know if you know Graham Allen, who's a former Labour MP and has been a very long-standing sort of constitutional kind of person. But he was starting a project which got some significant funding to sort of scope it out, and it was going to be a whole constitutional convention done sort of during the last Parliament, assuming it went on for the whole 5 years. And they've been sort of, you know, designing the methodology and planning out how exactly it was going to look. Takes a lot of resources and so on. But if this was something that that all of the opposition parties were interested in, I'm very confident that there'll be all sorts of people willing to, you know, provide resources and make it happen. And logistically, yes, it can take place. That one was meant to happen within, I think, 1 year for scoping and then 1 year for execution. It was derailed by the general election, but something like that could easily be set up, particularly if it has official backing from the parties. So you're muted at the moment.
Oh, sorry, Caroline. Hang on.
Yeah, so just quickly, even if that all happens, you still need to get a vote through the House of Commons, don't you? And we, even if all the opposition parties, without exception, voted for it, there still isn't enough. Oh,
I'm so sorry. I'm not suggesting that we'd be able to implement the outcome of that that process before the next general election. I just mean that the recommendations of it, in theory, could be put in the manifestos of all opposition parties,
okay.
And then, you know, you have the general election under first past the post. I suppose that is the ideal timeline. Yeah.
Thank you, Caroline. Next we have Chris Neal. You are unmuted. Please ask your question.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about, well, there's two things really. One is, do you think that it's true that the campaign for proportional representation with the Labour Party also needs to go alongside a campaign for progressive alliance? Because in order to actually bring about this legislation, we're going to need to get the Labour Party and the other parties that believe in proportional representation into the government, and I don't think that's going to happen without progressive alliance. The second thing was about the work in the constituency Labour parties. I was wondering what the kind of timing for that is, because it sounds really crucial to get those motions through constituency Labour parties, and how is that happening? Because you said there's 85 being done, but there's presumably 650 constituency Labour parties, and what's the kind of schedule for that? So that's the question. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Well, on progressive alliances, we don't take a position on electoral pack arrangements at all. There are organisations, obviously, that do, like Compass and like Unite to Reform. I mean, the point you make is an important one, which, if you're looking at those kind of things, which is that you need these commitments to proportional representation for those to happen, but we don't personally take a position on that. In terms of the timeline for Labour motions, we are at the moment phone banking already contacts in constituency Labour parties on the basis that we're looking for people who can commit to putting forward a motion when the time comes, whenever that comes, whether it's for a conference that goes ahead in September or whether it's much later on. But we haven't had a push on this kind of scale before, and there's a few reasons for that. It's partly because we just haven't sort of built up that support gradually, and it's partly because we haven't been ready to send motions to conference because we hadn't done the work with the trade unions, which we've now kind of opened a new pathway with. But I wouldn't take the fact that only 85 so far have officially backed PR as an indication that the rest don't back PR. If you were to get 85 motions to conference, it would be a really sort of very top tier issue in any year. I would be surprised and pleased if we got 85, but I think, you know, somewhere in the region of 30, 40, 50 would be a really significant win, and would certainly make it an issue that's on the agenda of that conference.
Thanks. So we're coming close to 4 o'clock. We've got 2 more hands raised, so we'll cover those 2 questions and then we'll wrap it up. So Ferdy DSouza, you are unmuted. Please ask your question.
All right, Emma, thank you very much. My question is, you know, the last referendum on PR, we lost. So has any analysis been done on it to see what was missing, what was lacking, some lessons to be learned, so that if we do have another referendum, we'll win?
Mm-hmm. Thanks for your question. The alternative vote, which was the option that was on the referendum in 2011, is not a proportional system. So technically, there has never actually been a referendum on PR. And this could be linked to the turnout was very low and there was a very bad sort of campaign about it. So our ideal with the good systems agreements is, as Joe was speaking about earlier, would really that this whole process would go forward with the Citizens' Assembly, that the recommendations would be taken up and that there would be no need for a referendum because the mandate would have been secured by electing a government that supports electoral reform. So overall, I think many people agree we don't really want referendums again. And that by going through the process that we've laid out in the Good Systems Agreement, by going through the Citizens' Assembly, by having it chosen by a broad spectrum of people from across the country, it being in the manifestos of the opposition parties, and if they were then to be elected into government based on that platform, that should be enough of a mandate in order to implement PR without the need for a referendum. Is that right, Joe? Do you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay, perfect. And lastly, we've got Jonathan Sindel. You're unmuted, so please ask a question.
Oh, good afternoon. And following Philip Cole's comment, thank you very much for arranging this.
Thank you for joining us.
First thing I'd like to do is to disagree with my young friend Philip. I think that, and it follows on from your last question and comment, if you want to ask the public about proportional representation, then the general question is much better than the do you support this one or that one. Yeah. Giving people an alphabet soup of alternatives is not the way to go. Do they feel that the current system reflects the country or do they not? Seems to me to be a pretty straightforward question. And if not, then you know what we're going to do. We're going to have a look at it. My second comment is, we can all have fun bashing the Tory party at the moment, but I wonder what the Labour Party's view would have been in the Blair years, when they were winning on a first-past-the-post system, 3 elections, and very happy with it. And I wonder what the Tory party view would have been at that time. Successful politicians rather like the way they became successful. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's a party issue at all, except at the moment, yeah, sure, our target is the Labour Party. The third is actually a question. How many members does MVM have currently? And do you have a feel of the age breakdown? Over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Quite a lot to unpack there. I'll start with the last question. So at the moment, our sort of active members on our database is around 65,000 people. So it's grown significantly. We had a huge surge of interest after the general election where we added about 20,000 people onto our mailing list, which was quite significant. I would say our demographic, we need to sort of look into it a little bit more, but I would say those that actually join into our events and actually come to some of the actions that we organise tend to be a slightly older demographic, but we are trying to sort of liven it up a bit and try and include as many people as possible. I think our sort of digital transformation project will help with that, although that's not the silver bullet that's going to sort of suddenly make us cool and hip and trendy. The problem being that proportional representation is not a particularly sexy subject, so it is quite difficult to sort of broaden the demographic that are attracted to the campaign. Joe, do you want to cover off Tony Blair's love of PR?
Yeah, and just before that, on the referendum on the question of principle, yeah, that would be, I think, a much better sell to the British public. But the other factor here is there's a very good report by the Constitution Society that they did, I think, just last year, looking at sort of pathways towards electoral reform. And one of the things they found is that countries that have had a citizens' assembly kind of process that's done publicly and is viewed as being quite credible, when they then come to have a referendum, they're much more likely to back the recommendation. So that's kind of another reason for having that sort of process in the Good Systems Agreement. But as I say, we hope we can avoid any referendums at all. I mean, it depends who you ask in the Labour Party under Blair. Robin Cook and people of his kind of ilk were really strong supporters of proportional representation all the way through, and were sort of agitating as much as possible. I don't know what the position of the party membership was, and in fact, until last December, we didn't have any polling of party membership. But I suspect there would have been still a very sizable amount of support. But it's just a matter of mobilising the support that is there now, and I think also going beyond just the sort of the lip service of it, and really getting a kind of deeper commitment to it, and an understanding throughout the Labour movement that they're not going to be able to achieve their aims in society through a first past the post system. And that's some of the stuff we cover in those reports we looked at a bit earlier. So do check them out.
Brilliant. Right, well, it's bang on 4 o'clock, so I think we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you very much for everyone who attended. It's always lovely to see your faces and have as many people as possible joining. We hope to do some more sessions of these, but like I said, we've recorded this session and we'll share it on our website, so you'll be able to come back and view it at your leisure. So just a reminder with these links that I've got up here, so if you are interested in signing up for our mailing list and you haven't done it already, go to makevotes.matter.org.uk and join the movement. Joe is always very keen for people to get involved in the CLP project, so if you're able to hopefully put a motion forward or invite a speaker to your CLP, then go to the Labour for PR project. And obviously I'm always interested in having new local groups all over the country. So if you're keen to start a new local group, please drop us an email. It's local@makevotesmatter.org.uk. But thank you very much for joining. It's been a pleasure to have you, and I hope that we will see you in the flesh very soon. And please stay safe, stay home, and we'll see you all again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.